Grace be unto you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. My sermon this morning, you'll be happy to know, is not based on any of the readings that you've heard for the day. And if you were listening to those readings, you know that they are, well, you could describe them in various ways. Some are bewildering and others are obscure and others just don't even make sense. So we're going to abandon those readings, and rather I'm going to use as my text for today the current situation here at Union Lutheran Church. You all know that we are in a pastoral vacancy. The future is very difficult to predict, except to say that having faith in God to provide, we know that all will be well. It's just a little difficult getting from here to there and wondering what's going to happen in the meantime, in the so-called interim. Now, it may take some time to get things in order, but this time, Carl was speaking about the present, as the text said today, this is no time for despair. It's not a time to have doubts and worries, although that's easier said than done. Rather, this is a time to be deliberate and to be faithful and to be grounded and to be realistic. Now, I've been thinking about the kind of pastor I'd like to see come to be our shepherd. Now, I'm not talking about an interim pastor. That's another animal. I'm thinking to the time when we call the next regular full-time pastor, whenever that might be. Now, I'm not very concerned about whether it be a he or a she, and I don't care if they're tall or short or fat or thin, even young or old, but there are some qualities that I would like to see in that person. So, in the spirit of David Letterman, here's my top 10 list of the things I would like to see in our next pastor. Number 10, I want a pastor who will not only preach the gospel, but daily live it out in the way they do their ministry and relate to people. Now, I know David Letterman used to take his cards and throw them up in the air, but I don't think I'll do that. Number 9, I want a pastor who recognizes that Holy Communion is the central focus of our Christian worship. It is what makes our worship distinctively Christian. Number 8, I want a pastor who makes no distinction between sacred and secular, but rather sees everything that God has created as holy. Then, if something is sinful or profane, to point out that we are the ones who cause it to be so. We all, as St. Paul said, fall short of the glory of God. So, having said that, number 7, I want a pastor who will help us to see our sinfulness and proclaim to us the love, mercy, and forgiveness of God. You know, if you've been paying attention, you know I've already gone through 4 cards. You know where I am in the sermon. You can almost predict when it's going to end. Maybe. Number 6, I believe that every sermon is a stewardship sermon. By that, I don't mean every sermon has to speak of money, but I understand stewardship relating to all of life. So every sermon should speak to you and me as managers of the lives, the gifts, that is, that God has given us. Number 5, I expect our new pastor to be an example of God's love. Indeed, the key to the Christian faith is love. Jesus told his disciples, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And John, in his first epistle, says that we love because he first loved us. John 3:16 assures us that God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. This is a message I feel we can't hear too often. Before I get to my last four, let me suggest to you that if this idea has not yet occurred to you, I'm going to suggest it to you, and that is, why don't you make your list of the top 10 things you'd like to see in a pastor? Doesn't have to agree with mine. It'll probably include things that I have not included. And maybe you'll even exclude some of the things that I've said. All right, number 4. I believe that James was right when he said faith without works is dead. As a result, I hope our new pastor will encourage us and help us and guide us to put our faith into action as we daily go about living our lives. Number 3, I want a pastor who is not only a preacher but a teacher as well. There are things you and I need to know about Jesus, about the Bible and the church that the pastor can and should and must help us with. Number 2, God does not call us to be successful, but God does call us to be faithful. And faithfulness begins with the smallest child on up to the oldest adult in the congregation. And, of course, it includes the pastor, perhaps as the preeminent example of faith. So one question I hope our new pastor will keep asking us is this: what is God calling us to be and to do in this place at this time? That is, what is God's will for us individually and as a congregation? And number 1, as we approach the 500th anniversary of the beginning of the Reformation, I want a pastor whose theology and orientation are solidly Lutheran. As Lutherans, we have a heritage and perspective that I believe need to be perpetuated. And I want a pastor who is committed to doing so. Well, that's enough. My watch tells me so. My list is not exhaustive. It doesn't say anything about working with committees or visiting the hospital or being available for counseling, or doesn't say anything about being an administrator or musically inclined or working with disaster relief. I mean, you could take this list on, and perhaps these things will be on your list. As I said before, I encourage you to make your own list. I think it will be of great help as we seek out and call the next shepherd of Union Lutheran Church. Amen.